Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. My name is Tony Rose Deanna, they, them pronouns, a designated hype person here at MCP, and I am joined by Sam Meisenburg, a co-founder of Study Snacks, a training company focused on cybersecurity and AI. And Sam is a super user of MCP strategies and products, which is also so great to hear. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah. It's just really exciting to be in this space with you. And shout out to Rob for connecting us. And so thank you so much for saying yes to the podcast. And so before we get started, what is bringing you joy currently?
So I have this transparent bird feeder that you can stick to the window. So you see the birds when they come up. And despite the cold, the birds are still coming and eating. So if it seems like I'm distracted during this podcast, just because I'm watching the birds, okay?
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yes, yes, it is a thing. And perhaps we can drop a link to it in the show notes, right? What if this whole thing was like a pyramid scheme so I could just sell this transparent bird feeder?
Oh my gosh, the pyramid schemes are something else. So, but no, I would love a link to that because I do love birds. And I feel like we're getting at that age now where bird watching is a thing. And I feel like that's how I know I'm aging is because I'm like, oh, birds, how nice. All right, well, tell us more about who you are, Sam, because I know you and I just met. So I'm also getting to know you as well as our listeners. So tell us about who you are and how you started your MCP journey or Study Snacks or honestly anything that you've done.
Sure. Well, I feel like I can answer your question in a couple different ways, but I feel like to tell you the whole story, I need to make a confession. I'm a little ashamed and embarrassed, but I used to lecture. I know. I used to stand up in front of the board and just talk at the students. And most of the time it was actually a virtual board because I did a lot of live online teaching for adults. And, I knew like deep down that it wasn't really working and I was only connecting with a couple of my students. But I always thought the solution was just to kind of get better at lecturing, like bring more energy, change my slides, use less slides, use better analogies, or just be funnier, which is a problem because I'm not very funny. And I even learned how to juggle. I'm totally serious. I learned how to juggle because I was like, when people aren't paying attention, I'll just start juggling. Yes, for those of you listening on a podcast, I'm juggling balls right now. I got 3 balls. Here comes a 4th and a 5th. No, I'm joking. But I never, of course, addressed the underlying issue, right? Of the problem was lecture in the first place. So when Study Snacks, which I mentioned, typically does adult learners, had an opportunity to work with high school seniors, I knew that if we didn't change the way that we taught and we just taught in the same way that I'd previously been teaching, we would have been cooked, as the kids taught me to say. So I wanted to kind of redesign the whole learning experience, start from scratch. And that's when I came across MCP and your guys' methodologies. And, to cut to the punchline, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that MCP teaching style has changed my life, both inside the classroom and a bit outside of it. I don't think I've ever had more fun. I don't think the students has ever had more fun. I don't think I've felt like I knew my students as well as I do right now. And I can't see myself going back and teaching any other way.
Oh man, that's like, I need to steal your 2-minute pitch and use it for myself, honestly. No, that was really great, right? Because lecturing, that was kind of what we've known all of our teaching or learning career, right? And so it's just like, it's the norm, it's familiar. And like you said, we really tried to make lectures as engaging as possible. I know for me as an English teacher, I had stories, I had jokes. At the end of the day, though, my kids are just like, what do we learn?
Yeah, exactly. It's like people don't learn from when you talk at them. They learn when they do things. And that sounds so obvious, but it took me a long time to realize that.
Yeah. And again, that's another thing too, right? Like you said, it sounds so obvious. And I think we just forget. I just think, again, it's the familiarity, right? Of like, you know what, I've been doing it this way, so I'm going to continue doing it. And I know it's not working, and yet I still need to be reminded that like, oh, even me as a teacher, I hate professional developments where I am being talked at the entire time, right? And so it just trickles down. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing just a little bit of background of like where you were and then how you got started. And so, you did talk about MCP methodologies. How did that show up in the training and within the larger context of workforce readiness training and professional learning?
Yeah. So to answer your question and to kind of summarize the whole thing, I'm going to name drop for a second, even though you already mentioned this name. So Rob Barnett, co-founder and CPO of MCP and author of Meet Every Learner's Needs. Yes, this is a pyramid scheme to sell Rob's book. No, I'm joking. He talks about an analogy that's near and dear to my heart because I'm a baseball player. And I think this podcast is coming out in March, so it's good timing because it's spring training. Anyway, he talks about at-bats. So he says, how many at-bats can you get the students during class? And when I do my lesson planning, that's sort of like all that I think about. During lecture, they get no at-bats. But even a small moment can be an at-bat. So like, I don't know, if you need to introduce some sort of big, heavy, abstract concepts or content such as privacy, you could do a true or false. True or false, your organization can see your private browsing even if you're in incognito mode. True or false, Tony Rose?
That's scary, and I want to say false, but I feel like the answer is true. And now I'm like, dang, I will never use incognito ever again.
True or false? Your school can, see, what you're doing if they own the device. My point is, small moments like that get people excited for the content. And then I think about higher stake at-bats as well. So meaning this might be a small group activity, right? Students working together in a group, maybe they have to write their own privacy policy. And then they have to present it to the class while the rest of the class tries to find loopholes in the privacy policy. And then I think of like one more sort of obvious at-bat, which is the independent self-paced work. So this, as a ex-lecturer, as you were saying earlier, is like a little nerve-wracking because you're saying, hey, student, go off on your own while I'm in the classroom, get on a computer, install this VPN, try to track your IP address, and then go see how that affects your, helps with privacy online. And I'm just there to see if you need support or you have questions. And that is a weird feeling for somebody who used to lecture when it's a quiet class and students are doing independent work and I'm just walking around. But again, as we sort of said, that's teaching. Teaching is not talking at students, it's supporting them when they need help.
Yeah, and when we're talking about students too, it's all ages, right? Not necessarily just K-12, but also adult students, right? Adult learners. Now, Sam, I don't know what at-bat means.
Okay.
So for listeners who may not know baseball terminology, and also for me, can you tell us more about what that means?
So at-bat refers to when a player will step up to the plate. So if you know what home plate is, what happens is you go into the batter's box and you have to face the pitcher. And the pitcher is trying to get the hitter out and the hitter's trying to get on base. And that whole interaction is called an at-bat.
Oh.
Now, if we were doing some MCP learning here, what I might have you do is actually, let's go to a baseball field, watch a game, and then maybe you can actually step into the batter's box and grab a bat. And then you can learn what that bat looks and feels.
Oh my gosh. Now I can be like, I'm going to go to all the baseball games and say like that's what they're doing. It's at bat. Like, hey.
Yes. All the fans are like, wow, they know so much.
I know, right? Okay. And this is really fascinating too, especially when we're talking about like privacy policy, right? Even as an adult, I am ashamed also like you to say that I don't read any of those policies, because I'm like, the terms and conditions, I'm like, accept, because this is something that they don't make accessible for me anyway, right? Like, especially for my neurodivergent brain, you're going to give me lots of words and words that I don't know. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the motivation to read all of that. And that's a lot of truth for a lot of people. That's truth for a lot of people, right? And so for you to be able to break this down of like, hey, we're going to create your own privacy policy, and then we're going to evaluate and analyze, like, are there loopholes? Are there things that we could do better, right? And then also, like, providing this space, too, where students can ask questions, right? Or just be like, okay, now I can create it, so now I know how these privacy policies look, how they feel, how they sound, all of that, which I think, again, like you said, right, it's less talking at them and them doing more. And one thing that I really enjoy about this model, too, is that there's less work on me as an educator. There's more work on the folks that are coming in, and that's how it should be.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I agree with you. It's less work. However, it's more work in the planning.
In the planning, yes.
Right? So I actually am probably way more comfortable and have to do less prep if I just go in front of the class and start talking, because I've taught this so many times. I think I have a good analogy to explain it, whatever it might be. That is technically work because I'm the one talking, but I don't have to think about it. And it's so easy. And I just, my like muscle memory takes over. But to have a, self-paced, skills-based mastery lesson takes a lot of pre-work and lesson planning, but also as teachers, like, that's fun, right? Like, creating a learning experience, at least for me, is a lot of fun, brings me joy. And you're right, like, in the room itself, the students are the one working. And as you said, that's how it should be.
And thanks for calling that out too, right? Because we do hear a lot of comments of like, oh, it's a lot of front load planning. And the thing is, like, we already plan anyway throughout the school year. So you're actually taking your time back, and then you're actually using your time more intentionally with your students because you're in the same space. And you actually know where the unit is going, what the lessons are going to be, and it's not just like a surprise, right? This made me think too of a headline that I may have read somewhere on LinkedIn, like someone had posted it, about how they think college professors should teach K-12. And I was like, oh, that definitely should be a thing. And no, I'm not going to like go off on my cousin. I'm not doing that at all. My cousin, she's, PhD, she's in her doctorate program, and she does teach undergrad. And she's never had any teaching experience before at all. So I'm constantly like picking her brain of like, hey, how are you making this more active for your students so that you're not just lecturing all day? And when I read that, I was like, dang, that's so true. Like, I really do think folks who are creating and planning these learning experiences, they probably should go into a classroom and see what the best practices are, because talking at students, no matter the age, doesn't work for anybody.
Yeah. And I think to your point earlier, like, teachers, especially with adult learners, can just use their instincts. Like, would I, as a student, enjoy sitting here being talked at? Like, of course not, So just put yourself in the shoes of the learner, and all the planning around the lessons will kind of take care of itself.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I'm also thinking back, I think it was like the year before I started implementing the model, where I was coming into school in the morning. One morning, I was like, what am I teaching today? I think we're talking about figurative language. I guess I'll just do that. I'm like, what? That is wild to me, how unprepared I was, and how this model really like forced me to plan and lay everything out. So, okay, great. Okay, so how did the high school students take to like uber technical concepts such as cybersecurity? Because again, we've heard a lot about cybersecurity, but this is again a topic for me that I avoid because I don't know anything about it. My brother does cybersecurity, and I've yet to talk to him about it because I just don't understand the language. So how do you get high school students involved, engaged, and motivated to learn about this?
Yeah, well, if you talk to your brother about cybersecurity, I have a feeling that they might say, look, cybersecurity might sound technical and like uber arcane, but actually underneath of all that, it's not. It is all about critical thinking. It's all about, communication. It's all about risk management, things that high school students are learning to do in their lives, like right now. And so I think if you can just tie it back to what they're doing and their instincts and things they're already good at, I think they'll have a natural affinity to it. And, making the content fun and approachable also doesn't hurt. Like, one thing that we did that I'm really proud of is that we staged a fake cyber attack during class. So in the middle of class, I had someone come in from the students' organization, and she was like all flustered, like, we just got this crazy ransom note. Can you help us figure out what's going on? And I was like, well, I'm in the middle of class, but sure, if the students help me, I suppose we can figure it out. And, they got to learn how to isolate the attack, how to respond to it from a PR perspective, and how to quantify, the cost of a cyber breach. And I think I had them fooled. Like, nobody was willing to admit it. I was at the like halfway through, I was like, all right, guys, like, this is fake. And they're like, oh yeah, of course we knew that. I was like, no, I don't think you're willing to admit it. So anyway, I'm sure some of the students thought it was cringe and it was weird and it was, a little hokey, but ultimately I tried, and you have to take the risk. And sometimes you have a good idea and it doesn't work out in the live classroom, or sometimes it's on the fence and it works out, perfectly. So I just feel like doing as many small things as you can to make it more real for the students is something that I've seen work really well.
And again, like you said, making it more real, right? You also mentioned strengths, knowing your students' strengths. So how do you figure out your students' strengths? Is there like a conversations, one-on-one, surveys, reflections? Like, how does that look for you?
Yes, I'm gonna choose from the list that you gave me, which I think it was A or B, which means one-on-one conversations. And that's also the beauty of the MCP model. You can have more one-on-one time, right, with your students. So what we did at the very first class at the beginning, while, you guessed it, students were doing some self-paced work, I brought in each student one-on-one to have a conversation, just to get to know them a little bit better, figure out what they want to do, long-term, and how I can, make connections between what we're learning and maybe a cybersecurity world to kind of what they want to do. And, you can also just pick up strengths along the way when you reflect and look at all the self-paced assignments that the students submit. So one of the things they had to do was write a spear phishing email to try to trick a user into clicking a link. Yeah, I know. It was a lot of fun.
That's wild. You didn't send it. They didn't send it to anyone, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Because that's a real world application, Sam.
Exactly. And actually, I just want to go down this rabbit hole for a second, because it was actually, you brought up something interesting when we were talking about the privacy policy, where it's like, to understand something else better or somebody else's perspective, it's always a good idea to do it on your own. So meaning these students will probably never, ever fall for a spear phishing email, because they thought along with the attackers. And if you can put yourself in the attacker's shoes, you're going to understand how they operate and sort of what you need to do to avoid, falling for traps like that. So to go back to your original question before that rabbit hole, I just want to say, as that self-paced exercise is an example, I got to learn, this student is a strong writer, right? Or this student might have used AI to write this, but they didn't do a lot of editing. Let's talk about that. Or the student may need some work on their writing skills. And then you can kind of just pick things up as they actually do more. And you can never get to know a student as well as when you actually look at the stuff that they do.
Oh, this is so great. I love this concept of like, do it on your own, right? Like, you can put yourself in an attacker's shoes, like perspective, right? And this made me think of, I was an RA in college at UGA, and we had to take this class where it was all about like human behavior. And one of our tasks was, hey, look at a marginalized group, right? Look at something that you are not well aware of, and then have conversations with those, with people who are in that marginalized group, and then like just follow them for a day to see how like they function and navigate in the world, right? And so now, funny story, Sam, I was like, you know what? I have a lot of gay male friends. I want to go and shadow a lesbian. Foreshadowing, because now I'm a big old queer, but like it really opened my eyes of like, wow, I never considered that this is a challenge. I never considered that this is a stereotype or the way that folks are being discriminated, right? But like being able to find someone who is willing to just show me a day in the life of, you know, whatever it is that they're doing, it really made me more empathetic, first of all. It also made me more aware of my surroundings and like the privileges that I have had as whatever I was showing up as back in the day. And so it was just really interesting for you to say this of like, no, like put yourself in the shoes of the attacker. So then now, again, like you said, critical thinking skills, right, are now expanding. Communications also expanding, because you're then being able to create, like you're able to create from that person's perspective. Right. And how cool, that's creativity as well, right? And then the risk management piece of it, of like, hey, you know, phishing emails, like spams, the scams, all of that, like, you know, they're around. And so now let's like create and see how all of this could pan out. I just, oh my gosh, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate that. And I think like that so cool moment is like something that, as I sort of alluded to earlier, can come naturally to a teacher. It's like, if I were learning this for the first time, what would be cool to me? What would I want to see? What's the coolest thing I've seen in the real world of cybersecurity, and how can I make that into an actual lesson? And that is more fun and more rewarding to craft lessons than to craft a lecture.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too that a lot of our educators do come into the classrooms with their passions of whatever they're teaching, right? Like I became an English teacher because I love reading and writing. Mm-hmm. So, and I wanted to create all kinds of worlds for my students to partake in. And so again, there's this passion, right? Like educators are really passionate going into the classroom. And I think sometimes we burn that light out because of systems and procedures and expectations that are really not sustainable. But I love this. So, okay, we're gonna shift the conversation from cybersecurity. Oh, but before we do that, I wanted to ask this question, Sam. What is one thing that people should know about cybersecurity that like most people don't know about, like a common thing or something that's important that we should know about that not a lot of people know about?
Oh man,
putting you on the spot.
Oh man, yeah, you're putting me on the spot. Let me think. Oh man, it's a tough question. But I would say, going back to our concept of privacy, it's important to remember that you can't be completely private online. That's an easy way to think about it. I know. Sorry to disappoint. But if you like, even going with that concept that we talked about, if you were to install a VPN, virtual private network, on your computer, sure, your internet service provider or your school or your organization can't see the websites or the traffic on the network that you're going to, but the VPN provider can. So it's all about a trade-off of like who you want to trust with your data, who you want to trust with your privacy, and it's not always perfect. So just remember, you can't fully be incognito, and it's about making decisions about who you want to give a little bit of visibility to.
This is coming. I mean, this is like bringing up so much for me. I was in grad school and my professor like really got onto me because we were talking about privacy and Google, right? And I said, well, I don't care. They already have my data. Right. He went off on me. He was like, that is so ignorant to say. Like, what in the world? You just don't care if your data is being collected. So do you have like, not Chrome, but like, do you have another browser that you would recommend where it's a little bit more private?
Yes. I feel like this whole podcast is now just a way for me to sling other products and peddle the products. But Brave is a really good browser. I think if you really want to get serious, you could like go on the dark web via like the Onion router, I know, or you can use something called DuckDuckGo, which is a little more user friendly. So yes, I'm not here endorsing any products, but you should look into it yourself.
I've heard of DuckDuckGo. That was what my professor was telling all of us to switch to. And I mean, this was back in 2019. And I was like, no, we're fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. And now later on, it's like, oh, wait a minute. You literally have everything. Okay, well, thank you for entertaining those questions and expanding my brain. We're going to shift to AI training. Because again, this is a hot topic right now in education everywhere, honestly. So why is this important to offer to high school students?
Well, so yes. And I just want to say that we got to say the obvious thing, which you alluded to, which is like a lot of smart people are saying AI and generative AI is going to change the way that we work and how we learn. And we're seeing that happen in real time. So I don't think I need to rehash why it's so important, but young people need to know it, especially because it's going to show up in the workplace, right? It's going to be part of their work reality. Now, to help answer the question, I also wanted to share a couple, I think, interesting moments from class around our AI curriculum. So I talked to a student, and this is the power of one-on-one conversations, who told me that he had a D in calc. And I was like, all right, let's figure out what's going on. And he said, well, I do really well in the homework because ChatGPT does my calc homework for me. I don't do so well in the in-class tests. I was like, okay, that makes sense, right?
We love the honesty here.
Honestly, if students kind of feel safe and they know that they can trust you, you will be surprised by the amount of honesty and the stuff that they share. So I did feel flattered, right, that they're honest to share their grades. But we had a conversation. We said, okay, well, maybe ChatGPT can be used in a slightly different way. It can help you do more practice problems. You can ask it to give an explanation, right, of an explanation of a step-by-step process of how it got the right answer, things like that. So I think small moments like that, assuming that, it's a good idea to assume that students might not know how to use technology in the best way, and we're just giving little sort of nudges like that, I think was really helpful. There was one other moment I want to talk about from class, which is we spent a lot of time showing the limitations of AI, especially around human creativity. So an exercise that we did is we pulled up a poster of shoes, and I blurred out the caption, and we had a caption contest. Okay, who can create the best caption for this poster in this ad? And we let AI do it, and then we let the students do it, and it wasn't even close. The AI was cringe, it didn't make any sense, it was too long, and the students were just so creative. And I think they walked away feeling empowered. They walked away feeling like, oh, I have something to contribute. I think that they felt like AI is not a replacement. It's just a tool. And if I could summarize the whole thing, there was one review that a student left that I'm really proud of. We asked them, what was something that you learned from the class? And they said, I never saw AI. I'm seeing AI in a new way. I always thought it was about cheating on a test. That's, again, honesty, a word that they used, or getting an answer. Now I see it as a tool to build on existing ideas. So they don't see it as their peer or replacement. I think they see it as a tool that they're using to kind of elevate themselves. And I think that's the important frame of mind and mindset that students should take.
Oh my gosh, this is so great, Sam. I love that. I mean, great reflection from your students as well, right? And I think this is a different perspective too that you gave the opportunity for students to look at the limitations of AI, because a lot of the times what I hear is AI is great. Here's how AI can, do all the things for you. And it's no, there are limitations. It is a creativity piece of it as well. And I love that you said that students felt empowered, right? And I think just a lot more knowledgeable and, again, aware of how they can utilize these tools to better enhance the way they navigate in this world, right? And, you were also saying, when you use ChatGPT, there's prompting. And I was just thinking, this is a skill. Asking questions is a skill that we often don't teach our students because, again, in traditional lectures, right, it's passively lecturing, passively learning, and students can't really ask questions because it then the teacher get distracted and it's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying instead. And so I think with ChatGPT, this is another skill too that students can practice is asking questions. And so you also said, we want to assume that students don't know blank, right? And I always say that too, right? I always say, I'm just going to assume that my students don't know how to take notes. I'm going to assume that my students don't know how to do this thing that I'm teaching them, because what I don't want to happen is that gap continues to widen because I assumed that they already learned that skill from their previous year, when that's probably not the case. Even though I probably know, my 5th grade teachers that I work with are bomb, amazing. But I want to make sure, again, reiterating hey, this is a skill that we want to continue expanding and enhancing. And so I love this concept too of just, how cool. It's so real to do a caption challenge.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun, And I just want to also go back to one thing you said about not making assumptions. One thing that I do differently now that I didn't do before is I don't make any assumptions around time bounding. Meaning I, in the back of my head, don't say anymore, oh, this will take the students a half hour. Some students will take 5 minutes. Some students take an hour and a half, and that's fine, right? That's the beauty of self-paced. So I don't assume anything about time. I drop words like, this will be easy, because again, that's not something that you want to assume. So I think just changing my mindset and perspective has really helped me, connect and just be a better teacher for the students.
Ooh, now I have a follow-up question. The phrasing, this will be easy, you dropped that. How did you hold yourself accountable for dropping that?
Well, sometimes it slips out and you have to, you once you say, you're like, oh, I should say that. But no, it's a hard question to answer because I don't know if I have a good answer. There's nothing I did necessarily, but when I think the only part that I sort of rehearse or practice or spend a lot of pre-work around the actual words that I'm saying around class is all the transitions, because those are so important. When you are, especially live online, when you're transitioning between activities, that has to be tight, it has to be sharp. Everybody has to understand what they're actually supposed to do next. So it's a long way of saying if I'm introducing a activity or a self-paced exercise, I will have at least thought about what I want to say. So in my pre-work, I might have to edit out, or when I rehearse it, I might edit out me saying it's easy. So that is, I think, a one moment where that does come up.
Oh, this is great because again, right, you're planning and then you're rehearsing, so you kind of have that too in your head. I know for me, when I was trying to do more gender neutral terms in the classroom and not necessarily saying kings and queens or girls and boys, I told my students, hey, when you catch me say that, I need y'all to say, oh, Missy, you just said this thing, right? So it was really helpful for me and helpful for them also, oh, you're trying to be a lot more inclusive with the language that you choose. So we're going to call each other in and hold each other accountable. And I really loved that part. And I was like, if y'all just remember, if y'all notice, let me know, interrupt me right there, because I don't know. And then the time bounding piece too, Sam, right? You said you release that, you don't assume anymore. And I'm having a hard time grappling with this because I always assumed how long it would take my students. And the way that I did that was oh, this is a 6-minute video. I want to multiply that by 3. That's probably how long it's going to take my students to do. But I love this concept of you just saying no, actually, I can't assume, because you're right. Some students will be done in 5 minutes. Some students will be done in 50 minutes because that's just how they process. And the self-pacing is so good with allowing and inviting students to take their time. And then also, again, within boundaries, right? It's not like you have one lesson for 3 weeks. No, we're going to keep going. So thank you for just kind of disrupting that belief as well for me of oh, I don't actually need to have or be married to a time because I really don't know how long it'll take my students. So thank you for sharing that again.
Hey there, listeners. This is Zach dropping in with some announcements for you for this week. Want to start building your own modern classroom? You can sign up for our summer virtual mentorship program. From either May 19th to June 22nd or June 23rd through July 27th, you can work with one of our expert educators to build materials for your own classroom. We have scholarships all over the country, so you can enroll for free in places like New York City, Los Angeles, Oakland, Chicago, Minnesota, Alabama, and more. Check out modernclassrooms.org/apply-now to see if there's an opportunity for you. That's modernclassrooms.org/apply-now. And of course, I'll have that link in the show notes if you want to just click it. And we have a book club. We're reading Rob Barnett's Meet Every Learner's Needs together as a community. And our last session is an author Q&A with Rob on Wednesday, April 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can join us in sharing ideas, questions, and resources. Finally, Eileen Ng, Nichole Freeman, and Carmen Welton, MCP implementers and DMCEs, are presenting at NEASC Educator Showcase 2025 on April 3rd in Nashua, New Hampshire. If you're attending, please stop by and say hi. But for now, let's get back into the podcast with TR and Sam.
Now, given that this was your first time working with high school students, and bless your heart, I could never. I told myself that maybe when I turn it like 30, late 30s, my 40s, maybe I'll teach high school. But when I was younger, there was no way. What was your favorite part or moment from the training?
If you're going to make me choose just one moment, I'll try, because there are so many good moments. But something we did very early on in class number 1 had nothing to do with cybersecurity, nothing to do with IT, nothing to do with AI. The students got to make their own cell phone policy. They lost their minds. They loved it. I think they loved it because it signaled to them like, hey, this class is different. I'm an adult. I'm being brought in. I have autonomy over my learning. I'm in control. And I think that, that's what all young people want to feel, right? They want to be like they're in on the fold. And I think students know cell phones are a problem. So why not make them part of the solution? And I think I earned a lot of trust. I earned a lot of credibility. And I think it set the right tone for the rest of class. It was a big microcosm for what I was going to be asking of them for the rest of the class.
Just how dope would it have been, though, if all schools asked students to partake in the decision making of a cell phone policy? Because I haven't even heard of this. Maybe some do, maybe some do, right? But I know that this year, specifically this year, I've heard time and time again, we're going phoneless. Like, we don't have technology. Students can't use their Bluetooth headphones. They can't use their phones. Like, they have to turn their phones in. And I am so curious how cool it would be to have students actually create that cell phone policy and how often that happens.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I will say, obviously it worked for me in my class. I know every circumstance is different, but I think the other benefit of it is like it became less of a traditional classroom because I'm not your teacher. I'm your peer. Like, let's all learn together. Like, sure, I can maybe help out if you get stuck, but ultimately, like, we're all in this together trying to figure this out in real time. And I think that's a better dynamic, right, in a classroom.
Because you're not telling them what to do. They're creating what this learning environment will look like for them and how they can be successful. And there's a lot more buy-in and motivation for it, right? Exactly. And so, okay, question, Sam. How did you come up with this cell phone policy, create your own? Like, that's so dope.
So I cannot pretend like this was my idea. Would you like to guess who I got this idea from? Who do you think?
I mean, we only know one person together. Exactly. It's Rob.
Of course. He sent me some stuff that he did when he was teaching because, I think a lot about how can you create a good lesson. And one of the easiest ways to do it is look at what other people did, and obviously Rob taught a way different subject than I did, but I could understand the structure and the flow. So how did I come up with this great idea? I didn't. Rob did. And then I asked him whether it worked, whether the students were throwing out crazy policies that you might need to veto. And of course that didn't happen. So it gave me the confidence to do it in my class. And I really think, from that moment, like I said, I had the trust of the class, I had the credibility, and it was just fun and important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, shout out to Rob again, right? Sharing is caring. And I mean, I already knew Rob was cool, and like this just elevated him some more. So shout out to Rob for that. I mean, again, right, we talk about, I've heard students creating community agreements together, right? Like the class creating community agreements, which I think is also beautiful, rather than them coming in with rules already created for them, right? And so to even like further that with the cell phone policy, I think that's really dope. I love that there was an opportunity for that to happen.
And then just to add to that too, you know, the quote enforcement was never like a real thing that I needed to do, because students, I noticed, were sort of enforcing themselves, like amongst their peers. And we actually did something smart that I think worked out really well. We actually printed the policy, put it on a giant poster, and just put it like off to the side in the room. So it's like a physical reminder that, hey, remember when we did this cool thing together and you guys came up with this and agreed to this? And then a student could also just point to it, right? And say, if there's a disruption during class, hey, just point. Or even I could just point to it, right? And then that's all that needs to be said. So I think not only should you do the cell phone policy, maybe printing it out if it works in your classroom is a good idea too.
So are students able to revise the policy?
So we never got there.
Okay.
So I don't know. You can make the rules whatever you want. What I will say is there was revisions in real time, because we voted on whether this provision of the policy was going to be accepted. And it was just a very simple majority vote. I was a majority. I did not have veto power.
Okay.
And I was just part of the community. And for example, one student said, okay, well, if you are caught breaking the cell phone policy, then you have to do a wall sit for 10 minutes. And that was voted down. Democracy. Direct democracy.
Oh, and again, that is real world application, right? Like really being able to even know how government policies and lawmaking and all of that works outside of the classroom. So I love that. And the 10-minute wall sit, I would have not survived. I would have been like, oh God, I'd just rather not be on my phone.
There you go.
Okay, so I understand that you gathered a lot of data from this training, right? So what is the most interesting piece of data that this training generated for you?
Yeah, so I will answer your question, I promise, but I want to just give one piece of context before I get to it. And that is, you know, look, I acknowledge that another teacher who's hearing this podcast might say, this is workforce readiness training. Of course, you can do all this fun stuff and give all these students at-bats, which Tony Rose is when you, I'm just kidding. So of course you can do all this stuff. I can't, because I have a test, some standardized state tests at the end of my curriculum that I have to do. The students have to maintain this pace, and lecture is the best way for me to actually deliver that content. So I want to acknowledge that. But I also want to share some data, now we're getting to your question, that hopefully might give that listener some hope. So we did do, even though it was a skills-based course, we did do a diagnostic exam and a final exam on the front end and back end. 55% student average, cohort average on the diagnostic, 88% on the final exam. So that's a long way of saying that, you know, I get it. It's just one data point, but I'm sure there's much more data, MCP, that supports this idea that a self-paced, non-lecture classroom can still help students, quote, learn the language. I mean, you used that phrase earlier, learning the language of cybersecurity. That's something that we did during class. And that can show up, and those positive results can show up in a traditional multiple choice exam.
Love that. And I've been hearing from guests too, Sam, that trust the process, right? Trust the process. It may not be nice and perfect in the beginning. That's why we iterate, we make changes, we edit, we give, we get feedback, we reflect. And thank you for sharing this data point too of like from, you said 55% to 88, right?
It's possible I said 55. I meant 51, which is even 51. Better. Fine.
Yeah, even better.
Either way. It starts with a 5. It starts with an 8. That's all you need to know.
That's a huge jump. That's a really big jump. And so I again, want to name the fact that like data will show you got to give it time as well. It's not like it's going to, it's going to grow overnight. It is throughout like weeks and months, right? Or even the year that you see the change, but definitely trusting that process. And I do want to say that I love that you mentioned that, some of our teachers will say like, mine's standardized. I have a curriculum that I need to follow. The district is telling me that I need to be here in this particular spot at this day, because when they come visit me, I better be at lesson 5.2, right? So I hear that a lot too. And my thing is, I've gone to different classrooms where it's like science and English, right? Like the subjects that are being tested. And I've heard time and time again that teachers say, I'm actually ahead of pace. Right? Like I am ahead of pace, and they're using that language for themselves too, not just for their students, right? Like I am ahead of pace. I feel like I can cover so much more of my content now with self-pacing and blended and mastery-based learning. And so, for folks who are hesitant, trust the process, make it look however you want it to look in your class, because there's no one right way to do it. And then also speaking as a middle school English teacher, where we did have MAP test, the 3 times a year, we had the Common Core, standards that we had to follow, as well as all the standardized tests. When I tell you that my kids really, really loved the model and being able to self-pace, their confidence increased, right? Now, mind you, I can't tell you what the data point is because that was back in 2020. But I know that the confidence increased. And I feel like when students' confidence increase, then you know what? Their learning and their motivation will also increase and enhance and elevate them, which I think is really dope. So thank you for sharing that piece of data. And just a reminder that you may not teach the same as I do, and we can still learn together, and we can still transfer the model and the skills into our classrooms. Because like you said, right? Rob shared this idea, and you were just like, oh, bet, I'm going to put that in my classroom. I'm going to do that in my classroom, and I'm going to do it in a way that makes sense for me and my students. And I love that. Okay, so what is the great segue to the next question of what is a piece of advice you have for teachers who want to start teaching with MCP methodologies?
I would say let the students know that you are actually looking at and paying attention to the self-paced work that they do. So if you are convinced or listening to this podcast and you already do self-pacing, that's great. But when the students click submit, something has to happen on the back end. So I made a mistake, I think, when I did my self-paced exercises and I designed them, right? I tried to have this message pop up on the screen after the students submit. And it said something like, great job, awesome work. And I obviously was trying to be encouraging, but then I realized a student might think to themselves, I can type in anything. I can type in some mumbo jumbo and I'm going to get the same congratulations, nice work message. Is that really what I want to be signaling? And then the student is forced to think about, is anybody watching what I'm doing? Does anybody care about this work that I'm doing? Is anybody paying attention? And that is a big abstract question that we have to let students know. Of course, yes, we are paying attention. We do care. So if I had to do it all over again, I would have, made a small edit to that screen that said something like, thanks for submitting. I look forward to reviewing your work and talking about it with you. Something like that. So the students know it's a little more real that I'm paying attention. So that was, I think, a moment of improvement that I needed to shape up for next time. There was one similar thing that I think went really well. If they did self-paced work at the end of class, so meaning I couldn't in real time review it and give feedback, the next class, I always started with the self-paced work that they did and pulled up one example of either randomly or one that was really good. And I would say, hey, Jaden, you submitted this in your self-paced work. This is awesome. This is why it's good. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you made this choice right here? Use this word. And then Jaden gets to have an at-bat and teach their peers, and peers can ask questions. And that, I think, was a really powerful moment.
Okay, I wrote down a lot of things, Sam, because I love what you were saying about Y'all, let's look at it. Let's actually pay attention to what students are creating, because if we're asking them to do this thing, the least we can do is provide them feedback and provide them real-time feedback, or at least feedback right away the day after, right? Not something that's good that they're going to get 3-4 days later or a weekend, right? And then this ties in with what I was thinking of busy work. I think now as educators, as teachers, we have to sit back and say, like, is this busy work that we're giving them, or is this actually something that will make them better at whatever skill that we're teaching them, right? And if it is something that's going to be better, then I, as an educator, should feel more motivated to look at the stuff that I'm creating for students to do. And so I really love, again, this reminder of like, okay, be intentional with the tasks that you provide students. Just because it's self-pacing doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a lot of busy work.
And there's one other mistake along those lines that I made in class. I remember early on they were doing some self-paced work, and time was running out, and they had to leave to catch the bus. And I said something like, "Okay, well, why don't you just hit A or type in spacebar here and then click submit?" And then I was like, but then the student's probably wondering, why am I doing this in the first place? If I use the words, "It doesn't matter, just submit," then the students are thinking, well, why am I doing this in the first place? Why does this matter for me? So to your point about making it as real as possible, giving them high stakes things that actually is not just busy work, that's meaningful skill development, that's part of the planning and the pre-work that we need to do as teachers.
The reflection as well, right? And the awareness, honestly, too. And I mean, like you said, right, you didn't explicitly say it doesn't matter. You said, just submit it. That equates to, it doesn't matter. Just like, do it, right? So you're so right. I have to stop saying this is easy. I have to stop saying, just submit it.
Yeah, exactly.
These are great reminders. So thank you so much for that, Sam. Okay, so what do you hope to see in the future?
Well, I hope that the New York Yankees win the World Series.
Oh my God, here we go.
I was going to say, you know who the Yankees are, but whatever.
I do know the Yankees, and I know that there's it's Yankees and who are always feuding. There's another team. Red Sox, yes. Yep. Because I have friends who are like Yankee fans, and then I have friends who are Red Sox fans, and I'd be like, I don't know what any of that means, but okay, cool.
Good. Okay. All you need to know is that they're feuding. You got it. So, but anyway, I want the Yankees to win the World Series. I don't think that's what you're asking me about what I want to see in the future. So I'm just going to tie back to something I said previously, which is this amazing world that I had the opportunity to operate in of workforce readiness. There was no standard curriculum. There was no standard exam at the end. And I was just thinking, it's not a new thought. I know a lot of people have written and talked about this, but why can't school systems be like this? Like, why can't school just be one big sort of primer for the workforce, and we can focus on skill development rather than an exam at the end? And, I'll leave it to smarter people to try to figure out how that actually works. But I just felt like the students had better time. Us as teachers had a much better time. And, I've done a lot of exam prep. When Study Snacks actually doesn't work with high school students, we work with adult learners to help pass certification exams. So I'm all about exams. I think they have their purpose. But for whatever reason, when it came to the high school students, I had a harder time seeing the value. And I think if you do want to use exams, maybe thinking about like the delta between a starting place and an ending place. Like, why does a 75% on this exam have to be this arbitrary threshold? I think it's more interesting to look at a diagnostic where a student might start and where they ended up, and looking at that delta as a measurement of student success and learning outcome.
Sam, this is a whole different conversation.
I know.
You know what I'm saying, right? Like, I feel like you've just opened up a can of worms, and I have so much to say, and I should not say any of it.
Well, you have to have me back on. But again, you will probably know much more and can articulate a lot better, so maybe I could interview you next time.
I could talk about a lot of things, and maybe we won't be so censored in that next conversation. Okay, so how can our listeners connect with you, Sam? Because I know that this is insightful. I mean, this is my first conversation about cybersecurity and AI training with high school students. So how can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, so you can search for me on LinkedIn. That's one of the easiest ways to do it. You can also send us at Study Snacks an email by just emailing hello@studysnacks.net. And I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and listeners, if you want to know more about Study Snacks as well, we'll put this in the show note. There's a link to be able to connect with Sam as well and to just be like, hey, I want to know more about Study Snacks. So definitely look out for that as well.
And then that link redirects to the bird feeder. So
there you go. Another motivator, right? Like, hey, that motivates you to. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Sam, this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise with us. I really enjoyed this conversation. So just thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find links to topics and tools we discussed in our show notes for this episode. And remember, you can learn more about our work at www.modernclassrooms.org, and you can learn the essentials of our model through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at modernclassproj, that's Proj. We are so appreciative of all you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.